तमस्तु मा विद्विषावहैः। ॐ शान्ति शान्ति शान्तिः। So that's why one is able to know one thing and know everything, because there is really only one thing to know. If there were many things, then we would be having a problem, correct? But there is only one thing to know, and what is that one thing? You. That's all. And that you is that, that you alone is the truth of the entire universe. That's why the universe starts with you, and that alone is, everything comes after. And so it's as it were, it's not that the names and forms that comprise this universe are falsified, It's not that we are negating them. They are transcended through knowledge. So that living in a rickety body, in a complaining mind, and in a world that is not going my way, I am still contented when I know the truth of myself. When I know the truth of myself, I am just contented, because I have transcended this body as I. Body is Atma, of course, but I am not just the sum total of this body that is falling into pieces as we speak. And I am not the sum total of the mind. Most of the time I have to say never mind. And I am not the sum total of the senses that drive me senseless. And I am not the sum total of anything that I can objectify. The subject cannot be objectified. The subject is not subject to objectification. That is the opening premise of this question. So, knowing the subject, who is not subject to decline, who is not subject to objectification, who is not subject to naming, who is not subject to a particular form or a particular name, who is as it were, a receptacle of all names and forms without having a particular form of the receptacle. And who is everything, and who is at once available, because it's the I because if that thing is there, it should be available. Otherwise, how are you going to ask for that knowledge? This is the question actually. Because if it's not available, how do you know that there's only one thing? It is available, because when I say, are you here, what do you say?
Yes.
Let me think about it. No, I don't know. I have to ask, I have to find out. That happens with the, we have stories about the village simpleton. Village simpleton was a very, innocent, naive fellow who believed everything everybody said. And then he was on a bus. And people would make fun of him all the time. He was sitting on a bus, and it was a bus going towards a place called Trichy. It was going to Trichy, this bus. Are you going to Trichy? And he said, I don't know. Am I going to Trichy? And then, of course, as soon as he said that, people started to make fun of him and said, how can you be going to Trichy? I saw you in Kumbakonam, which is another city which had already passed. And the village simpleton got down from the bus and said, I better go to Kumbakonam to catch up with myself. That doesn't happen except in a story. You don't have to ever, that which doesn't have to ever be caught up, either caught or caught up, or, is I. That I alone, when I say I am, without recourse to I am an idiot, I wish I was this, or I am not this, or I am abandoned, or I am neglected, or I am full of guilt, I am full of hurt. If I don't go to the next question, the next level, when I just say I am, that is jnana. Because when I say I am, what am I saying? I know I am. And that know never becomes I don't know. Because never do you say I don't know I am. I know I know, I know. It's that I know that underscores the I don't know of finite things and places, infinite places. Like I don't know Chinese. I don't know what, a particular species of a flower or an animal is. But how do you know you don't know? I know that I don't know. That I know, which never turns into I don't know. And that I am, which never turns into I am not. Which means what? Both I know and I know I am are limitless. Correct? Because they never turn, they are unchanging. They never turn into I am not. The I know which never turns into I don't know, it's limitless. Because if you ask the question, because the verb to know is a transitive verb, what do you know? Then you can at most say, I know what I know, I don't know what I know, I also know what I don't know. So what is all? What's the definition of all? The sum total of what I know and what I don't know is all, correct? Mm-hmm. Say yes, come
Yes.
on. Yeah. How long? What is there to think about? Yeah. What I know plus what I don't know, doesn't that constitute all?
Yes.
Yes. So do you know what you know?
Yes.
Yes.
Do you know also that what all you don't know you know?
Yes.
You know that you don't know?
Correct? Yeah.
So then you can say I am all knowing, can't you? It's a little bit of a stretch. This is Sarvagnya. I know all that I know. I know all the things that I don't know. Also that I know. How do I know them? That I don't know them. But that I don't know those discrete things is predicated upon the I know that I don't know, which is a general, unchanging knowledge. Here, for the lack of a better word, we use knowledge in the abstract sense, agnosis, we say. So it's that kind of it's almost it's even beyond ontological. So that's what it is. It is a knowledge that has no barriers. It is a limitless knowledge, knowing which I become all knowing. Because the all is nothing but the sum total of what I know, the discrete things that I know, and the discrete things that I cannot know because they are far away or I don't care or whatever the reason may be. So the sum total of what I know and what I don't know is all. And if I know what I know and if I know what I don't know, then that means I am already all knowing. Abba. Yes. And naturally, since this is the beginning of the Upanishad, everybody looks slightly unconvinced, but that's okay. It's all right with me. Because if everybody looked convinced now, then I would be disappointed. Because what to do the rest of the pages? Yeah. I also need some job satisfaction, So this is what he means by knowing that one thing, everything is known. Everything I know and everything I don't know is known by knowing the content and the context of the knower as knowledge itself. That knowledge which transcends the knower-known distinction. That same knowledge, like the ocean, which morphs into the wave called knower and morphs into a smaller wave called known. But without the wave, the ocean is still ocean, correct? Yeah. So here, without the knower, and without the known, that without discrete, the knower is a status in relation to the known. But still, underlying that status, upkeeping the status of the knower and the known, is that unending, unchanging, limitless existence, limitless knowledge, which always broadcasts, I know, I know, I know, I am, I know, I am, I know, I am, I know. And then it also broadcasts something which is slightly difficult to hear sometimes. I am, now, I know, now, I am, now, now, now. And the now is free of time, correct? When? Right now. Because the now is ever new. And the now is not a place of sorrow. Are you sad now? Say no, come on. Yeah, are you sad now? How about now? Now things must have changed. Even if you were to say yes, I would say that was then, this is now. That now has gone. That now has become this now. And so this now, knowledge, I, sentient, consciousness, limitlessness, knowing whom, everything that depends upon this I, this sentient conscious existence upon which all the existence of varied names and forms depend on, that I, if I know, everything becomes as well as known. That is the premise of his question. And so he says, iti vitarke, vitarka means conjecture, iti vitarke bhagavaha, he describes as, hey Bhagavan. That's why I was giving you a hard time about the case. And everybody was saying, there is no Bhagavan, why are you asking? There is Bhagavan. Okay. So yadidam vijneyam, everything that is to be known, vijnatam means totally known, visheshena jnatam bhavet, abhagatam bhavati iti, ekasmin jnate, knowing one thing, sarvavid bhavati iti, one becomes all knowing. I have already discussed this, okay? See how easy commentary is? Because when you already know what it means. Yeah. Iti, thus, and then Adi Shankara explains, Shishta pravadam shrutavan shaunakaha. You know, Shishta pravada means Shishtanam pravadam, prakarshena vadam. Means what? The vada, the discussion of learned people. So when Shaunaka was a baby, or maybe not so recently even, not so far away in the, in the past, even more recently, he might have sat in on the discussion of elders, learned people. And what would do the learned people discuss? How to make curry. No. What do they discuss? The only thing there is to discuss. So they are discussing about the self. And Shaunaka, either baby Shaunaka or adolescent Shaunaka or grown-up Shaunaka or the current day Shaunaka has sat in on many of these dialogues between learned people, between elders who are discussing this subject, and they may have dropped a few things along the way, a few knowledgeable bombshells like, oh, knowing which everything is known, and he would have said, what, who, how, and therefore that became the basis of his question, because how can you ask this question suddenly out of the blue? Because if you already know this, what is in the question, then there is no need for an answer, because that question is that deep. So if anybody were to ask, and they are going to ask very soon, the objector, the conscientious objector is going to ask very quickly. So if anybody were to ask, how did he know how to ask that question? We have to say Vriddha Vyavahara or Shishta Pravada. What is Shishta Pravada? Conversation between elders that he eavesdropped on. And he sat in on. Maybe he was the chai wala. He was bringing tea to his job was to bring tea. Yeah. Bring tea to those people. And like that, when you bring tea, you learn a lot of things. In fact, Pujit Swamiji tells a story that whenever in his village all these very famous musicians used to come, he was the designated tea boy to bring tea to the music maestros. And at which time he would hear them dialoguing about very subtle and fine aspects of music, and he ascribes his learning and his learning and knowledge of music to those dialogues that he heard. He was not intending to hear the dialogues. His job was to bring hot water and tea and keep. But in the process of seva, you learn a lot, right? So this is what it was. So Shaunaka might have learnt like that. So he gives one explanation of how he came about this question. It's such an erudite question, which really is rhetorical in the sense that if you know the answer to this, then why would you even want to study? Because you know everything. Well, how did he know? One explanation is because he listened to the dialogues of various qualified elders and teachers in the tradition. And then Shishta pravada also means vriddha vyavahara, means he also watched their conduct. And what was their conduct? They would not let the stress get to them. They would not, let small things get to sweat the small stuff. They would not be unusually disturbed when things happen. This is the lakshanani, the characteristics of a jnani, the one who knows, who's not afflicted and disturbed by things that happen, who has equanimity. And we have this kind of a situation in the Veda all the time. There is a sentence in the Veda called Swadhyayo Adhyetavyaha. One must study one's own Veda. Where is this written?
It.
Huh?
It.
No, in the Veda.
Oh.
It is written in the Veda. One must study one's own Veda happens to be written where? In the Veda. So if I don't read the Veda, this must means what? It's a duty. Correct? That I am enjoying to study my own Veda, I don't know, because I haven't read it. But if I have read it, then I come across that sentence and it is redundant, correct? Because I am already reading it. So what is the meaning? These scholars have analyzed this. What is the meaning of this phrase that one must study one's own Veda? How does one know that I have to study my own Veda before I study it? Because I see the father and the mother reading it, and then I know that I have to study it, and then just in case I'm thinking that okay, they are pressuring me to study it, I shouldn't be studying it, and then I encounter the sentence, then I feel ratified that okay, I have done the right thing. That is what it is. So here also, how does he know how to ask this question? Because he has already heard some version of this question being asked. One explanation. Okay? The next explanation will come very soon. अथवा लोकसामान्यदृष्ट्या ज्ञात्वा एव पप्रच्छ सन्ति लोके स्ववर्णादिशकलभेदाः सुवर्णत्वात् एकत्वविज्ञानेन विज्ञायमानाः लौकिकैः. So the second explanation Adi Shankara gives, how does he know how to ask such an erudite question, is that it is loka samanya, means he has looked at he is an observant person and he is a mature person, and he has looked at how all the effects, even on the relative level in the universe, resolve unto one cause. Like even, what is this? Pot resolves unto clay. So we have one pot, and then we have just move that. Yeah, but those they have seen. These they haven't. We have one more pot. I did the wrong thing because they fit the correct finger in the correct way. So I have to do that properly. Yeah, when this goes on the thumb. What about this one? There we go. How many pots? 5 pots. How many clays?
5.
Hey.
I'm sleeping.
Wake up. So, how many pots?
5.
5 pots. How many clays? 1 clay. Abba. See, this pot has a little, tap on its mouth. And then this pot has a pitcher, a handle, sharava it is called. And, and this pot has 2 handles. This pot has 2 handles on one side. This pot doesn't have a handle, and that is the cause of its sorrow. And I can't handle it, it says. Every other thing has a handle except me. So if you look at it from the pot intellect is an intellect that is, It's just gone to pot. It is not nothing to talk about because the pot intellect is as small as the pot, and the pot, identifying with its smallness, is full of miseries. And it says, and it gets very, upset at being very precariously held like this. It says, oh no. First of all, they all have a complaint. They have banded together and formed a union that they don't have a job satisfaction. Why? Because they are in this fancy covering, in this little case, and they have a case against me that I'd never take them out. They are sad. They just say that they don't have any kind of, job satisfaction. They are suffocated and stifled under horrible working conditions of this tissue paper. No air, no windows in their little factory, and they are very sad. Each one is sadder than the other. And then what? Then if they meet someone like the manager, the overseer of the unit, a glazed pot, correct? Blue collar. So you can say, you can keep on making stories, correct? And then, this fellow is big, he throws his weight around and he complains to the management all the time, and he comes in the way, and he may be playing a double game. When he is with them, he says, I'm one of you, ha ha ha, as if, just look at this motley crew, and look at this, fellow in, suited, booted and tied up in his own notions of superiority. And then look at this sad little, crew. They cannot even afford to buy glaze. You can just have a glazed look, due to neglect. That's all they can do. And then, he plays a double game. When he's with them, he says, I'm one with you. Yes, we have to teach the management a lesson. And then he goes through the back door because he has the, all the information about the management. And he says, oh, these workers are giving too much trouble. You have to kick all these people out. And he gets money from both sides for being the mediator, you see. Very sly pot. Yeah. So sly pot, crack pot, all these things, as long as they identify with this small little upadhi. What is upadhi? This name and form. Yes. This name and form, then what? The smallness is always rampant. The smallness is felt, and the smallness is felt through the iteration, the reiteration of the difference between one and the other. The smallness is maintained through the exacerbation of the differences, not the identity. Correct? So this is pot from the standpoint of the pot, from the point of view of the pot. But from the view of the clay, what is the difference between this? What is the difference? Nothing. You glaze over the glaze and it's all just clay. From start to finish it is clay. Correct? So from the standpoint of the clay, all is one. So then, when Shaunaka was small, these pots he was playing with. And so when Shaunaka was small, he was playing with pots, or maybe his sister was playing with some small pots, or whatever it is. And he saw that when they are all crushed, or when they crack, or when they become powdered, they all look the same. They go back to the same clay, and then he may have seen some potters. They come back. Or maybe his house was next to a jeweler's house. And what does the jeweler do? Same thing. Takes a small lump of gold, smelts it. Every other thing melts, but metals always melt. Don't ask why. He smelts it, undergoes a smelting process where it melts, the impurities are taken out, and the gold itself is too soft to make something, so there some silver and copper is added, and then it's crafted into an ornament, a chain, a bangle, a lowly nose stud, an earring, a big necklace, whatever it is. Various ornaments, many millions of ornaments. How many gold? One gold. This is what he has seen. This he has seen that all the effect resolves in the cause. The effect is non-separate from its cause, and in fact, the effect is just, a manifestation of the cause. And he has seen fiber and cloth, the yarn and the cloth. So, what is the fabric? Nothing but yarn, correct? So many yarns, warp, weft, etc. One fabric. And so, that also, with such a curious mind and an observant mind, he could have come to the conclusion that there must be likewise in the Jagat one thing, a master key to unlocking the secrets, all the secrets of the universe at once, including I. Because that I is included, this body, mind, sense complex is included. When I say Jagat, it includes the body, mind, sense complex also. You cannot say that universe over there, because the universe includes this I, which is asking the question, the I that is endowed with a body, mind, sense complex. And so Adi Shankara says, Tatha yat athava, or Loka Samanya Drishtya, in common parlance, from the standpoint of Loka Samanyata, like the examples commonly found in the universe, Jnatva, having observed them carefully, known them carefully, Papracha, he asks the question, and he elucidates his point. Santi Loke, there are in the world, Suvarnadi Shakala Bhedaha, like gold and ornaments. Shakala means pieces, Suvarna gold, Bhedaha differences. Suvarnatvat ekatva vijnanena vijnayamanaha laukikaihi. There are in the world the causes, the effects like golden ornaments that resolve into the cause that is gold. And I gave some other examples like pot, clay, yarn, fabric, etc. etc. So there is that kind of a thing in the world where one thing, resolves into another, and so seeing that, he wonders if there is a master key to this, to the question of this I, to the question of this Jagat. And then what? Then he says, Tatha kim no asti sarvasya jagat bhedasya ekam karanam yadekam asmin vijñāte sarvam vijñātam bhavati iti. Yeah. So, now, Tatha kim no asti. Tatha means, yatha he had said, just as the gold, etc. Tatha, in the same manner, kim no asti, something definitely is there. Sarvasya jagat bhedasya ekam karanam. There must definitely be, this is a conjecture, an inference, an extended logic, that since all the effects in the universe resolve into a certain relative cause, like the furniture into wood, yarn into cotton, into fabric into cotton, etc. And cotton tree into cotton bush, like this, there is always the effect resolves in the cause. So there must be some one thing in this universe that makes everything tick. There must be one master cause, knowing which everything is known, because everything is an effect. So what is that cause which is not caused? Because every effect has a cause, every cause has an effect. What is the effect of fabric? What is the cause of fabric? Yarn. Then yarn becomes cause. Don't spin a yarn. Yarn is an effect. Yarn is an effect of fiber. Fiber is an effect of molecules. Molecules is an effect of cotton. Cotton is an effect of cotton bush. Like this, every effect, every cause eventually becomes an effect. And his question means, is there a cause that is an uncaused cause? That is a causeless cause. Causaha na vidyate yasya. The uncaused cause. That which doesn't have a cause. Is there something that is not, again, doesn't have a boss sitting on its head? That is what I want to know. And he says, that is why, he says, knowing that one causeless cause, all the causes, the relative causes which become the effect of this cause, And this cause did not undergo any change to become the effect. Just like when you dream, you don't undergo any change to project your dream. Your own memories, your own knowledge projects, weaves a beautiful dream. You can never dream what you do not know. So your own knowledge weaves a dream, and then you don't undergo any change. Supposing if you dream of a donkey, you don't have to become a donkey to dream of a donkey. So similarly, this Jagat is like a dream-like projection of that knowing, sentient, limitless being whose truth, is you, who is non-separate from you. And then from the standpoint of being the cause of the universe is called God. From the standpoint of being endowed with a small body, mind, sense complex is called Atma, I, that same cause. And then, this is what he says. Nano aviditehi kasminniti prashnaha anupapannaha. What does nanu mean? Nanu means, hey you, listen. Who is talking? The quintessential doubter. Yeah. This is an ingenious method of the commentary to create the doubts and then to assuage them. And the doubts are personified into a hardened, disrespectful and a highly arrogant and highly combative individual. It's incarnated as that. Where is this disrespectful, highly combative, arrogant individual? Kidhar hai? Right in one's own psyche. Yes. That which is suppressed, that which is not given voice to, because nobody wants to look bad and say, I disagree with everything that you're saying. I don't know what other people are seeing. I don't see anything and I think you're talking nonsense. Many times people would like to say that. But they don't, because they see other people around are quietly taking notes. Okay, I don't want to look bad. I don't want to be the odd one out. And I don't want to rock the boat. Because I was raised to be respectable. I was raised to never ask questions. I was raised to swallow everything that was there, Even a crocodile, if it was given, I had to swallow. Without doubting. Because this is what, this is how, because this is how children are raised universally. Don't ask questions. You be seen, don't be heard, don't ask questions. Just shut up and do what we tell you to do. This is, this is everyone's past in a certain way. And the Upanishad, by creating this imaginary character who is combative, who is respectless, who has no shraddha, who has no bhakti, no devotion, and does not, is not interested in the teaching, except to be a proofreader and find faults, and is always, complaining and querulous, and is attached to, sometimes people are attached to that disbeliever, so that ego which is attached to the disbeliever is given an important presence in the discussion of every Upanishad. So that doubter is actually within all of us, really. At some point or the other, the doubter comes out. And if the doubter doesn't come out, that doesn't mean that everybody is believing everything that one reads, in fact, or one studies. In fact, this subject matter is not something, for us, God is not a matter of belief, it's a matter of understanding. There is no belief involved. The belief is just pending understanding. Because, the belief is flimsy. If you say, I believe in Ishvara, that's also a belief, correct? And if you say, I don't believe in Ishvara, that's also a belief. Both are beliefs, really. So we are not interested in beliefs. We are interested in understanding Ishvara as the truth of oneself. That is what it is. And so an understanding cannot happen without questioning. So the questions have to be definitely, and questions are definitely encouraged because of this. It's like a dialogic method, you know. What is that called? Socratic method. And so, this is what it is. I think it was there in other parts of the ancient world as well, nothing new, but the same thing. But here, what is interesting is that the questioner is embodied into a rude character. You're supposed to greet. If you're interjecting yourself into a conversation, you're supposed to say, hello, how are you, good morning, namaste, something. Here he says, Nanu, hey you. Very informal address. And what does this fellow say? Yeah, or whatever this fellow symbolizes, what does he say? I always say he, because let the doubters be he. And so, Nanu, he's finding the student who has respectfully approached the teacher, hasn't even sat down to ask the question, has barely said one word of the question, and the moral police, the questioning police has come, has blown the whistle and says, you cannot ask it this way, your question is itself wrong. Let us see why it is wrong. He says, Kasmin iti avidite sati. So are you asking about something you know, or are you asking about something you don't know? Well, Shaunaka was not prepared for this question. Shaunaka thought he was asking the question. Now this questioner is coming and asking asking and questioning the questioner about the nature of the question being wrong. And he says, objection. And what is the objection? Kasmin. Kasmin means what? In what? Seventh case. So knowing what and knowing which thing, everything as well as good as becomes known. So that means, the questioner says here, you know that something exists, correct? Because if you are asking, what is this universe predicated upon, then you know that something exists. And if you know that something exists, idiot, why are you asking that question? You should not be wasting your time or the teacher's time. You should not be asking. This is a anupapannaha, means untenable question. This question is untenable because you are asking something that should not be asked, that is redundant. And in the Veda or in any kind of erudition, the fallacy of redundancy is kept as far away as a barge pole. You cannot fall into the fallacy of punarukti dosha or redundancy. And so here the question is redundant. Because if you say, what is this universe predicated upon, knowing which one thing everything is known, you are assuming that there is that one thing to know. Do you know that there is such a thing to know? Is it established or is it to be established? Now the questioner is perplexed. Well, and already the objection has been raised. So this is what he says. Kasmin aviditehi, without knowing that such a thing exists, Kasmin niti prashnaha anupapannaha, your question is untenable because you are asking for something that should exist, that you are assuming exists without knowing that it exists. And then he says, siddhehi astitve kasmin niti syat yatha kasmin nidheyam iti. When that causeless cause has been established, then only you can ask, where is it, how do I know it? But when that itself has not been established, what are you going to do? Like for example, he says, like when we are doing a fire worship ritual, there are lots of empty pots around the fire pit. There is a pot to the south side or the left hand side, a pot to the north side or the right hand side, east and west. And then the ghee is to be poured first into the pots in a particular circle or an order for the particular fire ritual, and from the pot the ghee is poured in to feed the fire along with the chanting of incantations or mantras. Do you understand now how it proceeds? So first the ghee goes into the pot, and then from the pot it goes into the fire. And depending upon the nature of the fire ritual and what you are asking for, which pot is fed first. So now I know that the pot is there, correct? So supposing I am the ghee wala, the ghee bringer to the fire ritual, that is my job. I am bringing the ghee and I have to pour the ghee into the pots, but I don't know which ritual is being conducted. So I have to ask the Yajamana, the one who is conducting the ritual, sir, madam, whoever you are, which pot shall I pour it in? So when I say which pot shall I pour it in, I am assuming correctly in this case that there are many pots facing many directions, and I see those pots, I see that the pot exists, and of an existent pot I am saying shall I pour it into this particular pot? And here that existence of that very thing is not established, and you are asking, in what does the whole Jagat resides, because that what is not even established. So your question is outlawed. You are a bad student because you asked the wrong question. Thankfully Adi Shankara comes to the rescue and says, Na, no, not na. Naha, Akshara Bahulyad, Ayasa Bhirutvat, Prashnaha, Sambhavati Eva, Kasmin, No, Ekam, No, ekasmin vignate sarvavid syaditi. It should not be naha. I think it should be na.
No, it is not
No.
here.
No, it is.
It is na. For me, it is naha. I should correct it. Yeah, it should. It's not naha. Naha means asmakam. No, it is na. Na means no. Simple. Na. That's why first I read it as na, and then I got, I looked at this. Na. He says, no, the question cannot be worded any other way. And you are talking of the fallacy of redundancy. And if the question were worded any other way, Adi Shankara says, we would fall into the fallacy of verbiage. What is verbiage? Verbal garbage. Verbiage. Too many words. Akshara bahulyat means too many words. Ayasa bhirutvat means, out of a sense of trepidation concerning how this question is going to be worded, with an excessive sense of verbiage, which is itself a verbal terror. Since, see, this is so beautiful because he accused him on the level of, grammar, wording, and then the fallacy of redundancy. So he says, no, he answers him only on that level. And he says, no, he did the right thing in asking this question, because how else would you ask it? You would go, but maybe, that thing, if that thing exists, in that one thing, I have heard, just like the gold and the ornament. Look at what you're doing to yourself. Does that sound elegant? That too in an Upanishad? No. So just keep quiet with your fallacy of redundancy, because there is another looming fallacy large in your face, because otherwise what would happen is that the person, by the time they ask the question, the person who is reading or studying the Upanishad would lose all interest. Yeah. Because they are not getting to the point, they are going all over the barn and not coming to the point. Sometimes that's what happens, people go to Swamiji, Pujya Swamiji, and they will start asking a question, but they will start telling their life story first from the previous life, and then they will say, because of this, that happened, because of this, and Swamiji will be listening patiently. At some point he'll say, what is your question? In other words, he's kindly saying, come to the point, arrive, don't always be waiting to land, like a hovering helicopter, yeah. You make this chopping sound in front of the teacher, the questioner is has this annoying drone keeping on talking but without really landing. That is one problem. Sometimes you don't take off, that's another problem. Yeah, so this is the thing. So here he says the question is tenable and the question is worded appropriately. Thank you very much. Why? And he gives the reason. He says that, because, we will have akshara bahulyam, we will have too many words, and then everybody will be tired, the questioner will be tired. Ayasa bhirutvat means out of fear of tiring the teacher, the questioner, and the studiers of the students of the Upanishad. That is why the Upanishad practices economy of words. She is a lady of few words, our Upanishad. And what she does is that she leaves it to the teaching tradition to decode exactly in the same way. This teacher heard from that teacher, who was a student who heard from the previous teacher, and then the knowledge is transmitted in the same way. And then so he says, for these two reasons, the question is very tenable. And knowing this one thing, how does one become all-knowing? Because if I know clay, I become pot-knowing. Whether the pot manifests, I become if I know clay, I become the knower of everything in the clay world. If the clay manifests as a pot, I say I'm the knower of this pot. If the clay manifests as a lid, I know the lid as also known separate from the clay. And if there are million pots, I still know clay. And if the clay manifests in the form of a figurine, I know clay. So one clay, thousands of manifestations. If I know clay, I am okay, because I can say I know everything from the clay world. Nothing from the clay world can threaten me. Even if the clay is shaped as a snake or a crocodile, it cannot threaten me because I have seen it as clay. So similarly, is there one thing knowing which I become all-knowing? Is that one thing being all? And so the teacher now answers the question. Tasmai sahovacha dve vidye veditavye iti hasma yad brahmavido vadanti parachaiva aparacha. Yeah. Tasmai means what? Unto Shaunaka. Shaunakaya, fourth case. Angiraha, first case. Angiras. Aha means what? Said. Responded. Kila uvacha. So, tasmai sa ha uvacha. The ha means kila. Ha means indeed. Indeed he answered. Why indeed? Because the emphasis ha or indeed means that when you go with a sincere desire to know, your question too likewise will be answered. Yeah. And the teacher answers. Tasmai means unto Shaunaka, unto him. Sa Angiraha, Angiras the teacher. Uvacha. Uvacha means taught. Said. What did he say? Dve vidye veditavye. There are two knowledges, for lack of a better term. Dve vidye, two kinds of knowledge. Veditavye, that are to be known. And what are they? Para is the name of one and apara the name of the other. Para means absolute, the knowledge of the absolute, and apara means the non-ultimate or the relative. So there are two kinds of things to be known. One is called the ultimate knowledge and the other is called the knowledge of finite objects, relative knowledge. What was the question? What is that one thing knowing which everything is known? What did the teacher say? There are two things to be known. Ayyo, what to do now? Bad teacher, correct? No? Why? Because the teacher should answer what was asked. But the teacher is asking what was not asked, answering what was not asked. Why? How? Kimartham? Because see, if I say what is that, if I ask for directions, I mean this happens in India all the time. You say, how do I get to the nearest post office? Keep going straight. I don't know what this big thing is, Keep going, keep on going. Then what do I do after I keep on going? Ask someone else over there. And then you go, you go 1 mile, because before you meet another individual, this is a remote village post office. And then after going 1 mile, you meet one panwala, one small kiosk that sells, cigarettes and small sundries, small shop. And then you say, where is the post office? He says, keep going that way, the way you came, and ask the other one there. Which other one? The one that sent you here. So such answers are very annoying because your time has been wasted and you have been misled, correct? So you ask for one thing and then the person says, would you like to have tea? That is not that is not what I came for here. I came to know that one thing which makes everything tick. And then if you start talking about 2 things, now I'll be really ticked off because I want to know that one thing alone. And here you are talking of two things, correct? This is a problem, yes?
Yes.
Yes, it's a very big problem. We'll see very presently. But first, Tasmai Shaunakaya Angiraha Aha Kila Uvacha. So unto this Shaunaka, the one who asked the question, of course, Angiras, the teacher, responds, indeed. Kimiti uchyate, what did he respond? Ve vidye veditavye iti evam hasma kila yad brahma vidaha vedartha abhignaha paramartha darshinaha vadanti. He says, Kimiti uchyate, what does he say? Dve vidye veditavye. 2 kinds of knowledges must be known. Iti evam, like this he said. Hasma means indeed a long time ago. Means it did not happen yesterday. And then what is this knowledge? What are these 2 kinds of knowledges? That which the knowers of Brahman know. And Brahma Vidaha is qualified by 2 explanations according to Adi Shankara. Vedartha Abhignaha, 1, Paramartha Darshinaha. Vedartha Abhignaha means the ones who know the difference between what is the correct thing to do and what is the wrong thing to do. Achara means who have mastered the first portion of the Veda, who are dharmic by nature, they know what is right, what is wrong, and they have mastered the meaning and the purpose of the first portion of the Veda. And then Brahma Vidaha also means Paramartha Darshinaha. Paramartham Darshayitum Sheelam Asyasti iti. The ones that Ini has got that capacity, the ones who have the capacity to see, they are equipped, they are qualified to see or to understand the truth of everything. Yeah. So not only on the relative plane they are equipped to answer questions about conduct, doubts, fears that one may have, they're ready to be spiritual counselors on the relative level, but they also have the knowledge of the absolute. That such a person is called Brahma Vidaha. Yad Brahma Vido Vadanti. And here we see a beautiful humility on part of the teacher. The teacher doesn't say, finally one student I have caught hold of. Great difficulty. I was sitting under a tree wondering who will come. And then finally this unsuspecting Shaunaka has walked towards me and is asking some questions, and then I should have some feathers growing, I should start having some ego as the teacher. Oh, somebody is coming to ask me questions. I must be important. So first thing I have to do is tether him to this tree so that he doesn't run away. Because he could, and then what will I do? I will feel bored again. Because I have been sitting hoping to share this knowledge and no one is coming. And so let me just catch hold of this fellow. And how to catch hold? You will get lots of gold. It's something you can tell. You will get 8 kinds of siddhis. What are siddhis? miraculous powers. Yeah, powers. Miraculous powers you will get. And you'll start flying. You'll start walking on water. You'll start flying without a plane. And you'll start making things jump. You yourself will jump without anyone seeing. You can become as small as a fly. And then Hanumanji had all these siddhis. Hanumanji, when he was wanting to rescue Mother Sita in the Ramayana, the story is told that he was going to jump. He was in his jump from Rameshwaram in South India to Jaffna in Sri Lanka. He jumped, and in the midst of his jump, a big ogress came from the ocean. Ah, she said, and then Hanumanji got scared. He said, "What?" He said, "Out of my way." I just used scared means startled. He said, "What are you doing? I have to jump. I have to rescue Mother Sita. You get out of the way." She says, "No. I am the ogre of this ocean. This whole ocean belongs to me. And everybody who passes has to give me a due, a small fee." What is it? She obligingly opens her mouth and says, "Jump into it. You are the fee." So he can't be in two places at once, correct? Yeah. He has to either become the meal of the ogre, or he has to go and save Mother Sita. So what does he do? He deploys one siddhi and he becomes a small little annoying mosquito. Flies into her mouth, bites her on the gum and jumps out. And see, he says, "I have fulfilled my vow. I have jumped into your mouth." Before she can go, he jumps out because he's so small. And then she's nursing the bite inside her gums and he flies onward. So that is a kind of a siddhi. So the teacher could have said, "I'll give you lots of siddhis. You will have lots of miraculous powers. You will have magical experiences. You will feel you're floating without having low blood pressure. You will feel you will have a floating sensation. And then you will not sense your body, and you will feel light and wonderful, and you'll be wafting through space, and you will have that invisibility cloak, nobody can see you." All these useful siddhis, yeah. And then, but here the teacher doesn't promise anything. Neither does the teacher says, "Finally you come to the right place. I am the one who knows, me. He says, "I'm only teaching you what the previous teachers have told. What I have learned. Yad brahmavido vadanti." Hasma also has to be applied there. What those Brahmavids, the knowers of Brahman, said in the past, what they say, I'm going to tell you. A beautiful, example of the humility on part of the teacher here. Because this is not a cult. This is not based on belief. This is not based on some kind of a shenanigan of catching the knowledge and I am the chosen one to receive this knowledge. Everyone is chosen. You have to choose. This is not a prom. I'm telling you 100 times. Where you sit and wait, for somebody to choose you, to take you to the prom. This is not that. You have to choose to be a student. You have to choose to know. You have to choose to ask the questions. You have to choose to clear your doubts. You have to choose to assimilate the knowledge. The onus is all on you. This is not a salvific tradition. There is nothing to save. You are already saved. That is the message. There is nothing to save. There is nothing to enslave. And there is nothing to just conjure out of thin air and say, this is what I am giving you that you don't have. In fact, the knowledge works on paradoxy. And what is the series of paradoxes? The teacher has to assume that there is a problem, because really speaking there is no problem. And this non-existent problem has to be addressed with a kind of a non-existent solution really. And what is this non-existent solution? You are the existence itself. That is the solution. And so, because the student who is coming is afraid and insecure, that is the capital of every student. Everyone who is interested in this knowledge is afraid and insecure. Like the one who says, I have been bitten by the snake. What kind of snake? Rope snake. Yes. Because first you look for the person to see if they have any of those fang marks. Not finding any, then you do the next thing. The person is jumping up and down. I have been, dashtoham, I have been, bitten. Then not finding any marks on their person, you take them out to the lawn and say, where is the snake? Show me the snake. And what do they show? A rope which has 3 bends. This is the snake that bit me. So if you tell such a person you are being foolish, that person is not going to understand. It's not even enough to say this is not a snake. You have to tell it what it is. Look, it's a rope. Yeah. What you have done is aropa, means superimposition. That's why it's called rope. You have done an aropa upon the rope. And then what? That's why your mistaken notion that this is a snake is afflicting you by its bite. So too this universe. You replace the word snake with universe. That snake, which is a universal snake, is shown to be a benign rope, as benign as the rope. So the teaching proceeds through paradoxy, not through some kind of a cultish behavior of keeping the student under lock and key, so that you can continue to feel good and better, because they are under your, tutelage. So here, in the spirit of the Upanishad, which glorifies the teaching tradition, which glorifies the subject of this knowledge, the Atma, which is the truth of oneself, rather than glorifying the personalities, the teacher also says, Yad Brahmavido Vadanti, that which I was taught by other Brahmavids, that which all the people who know this know. What do they know? The 2 kinds of knowledge, bodies of knowledge, 2 kinds of knowledge must be known, he says. Ke iti aha, what are they? Paracha, Paramatma Vidya, Aparacha, Dharma, Adharma, Sadhana, Tatphala Vishaya, Vidya inheres. So anyhow, he says there are 2 kinds of knowledges. Ke, what are they? And para. And para means what? The knowledge of Ishvara as yourself. That is para. Paramatma Vidya. And in the word Paramatma, Atma comes. Atma means self. Atma, that is, happens to be para. Para means absolute. The knowledge of oneself as non-separate from God. That is called para Vidya. And what is apara? The knowledge of that which is correct, which is incorrect, and doing the right things, I will get the right fruits. Doing the wrong things, the fruits will also be the wrong kinds of things will be given as fruit. So both these kinds of knowledges must be had, the teacher says. And then what happens? Nano, kasmin, no, kasmin vidite, sarvavid bhavati iti, shaunakena prishtam, tasmin, vaktavye, aprishtam aha, angiraha, dve vidye ityadina. Nanu drops in. Who is Nanu? The quintessential questioner. First he found fault with the student's question. Now he is finding fault with the teacher's answer. He doesn't spare anyone. He says, what did the student ask? What is that one thing that makes everything tick? And now I am really ticked off, because instead of one thing, what did the teacher say? You have to know 2 things. I want to know one thing, and you are telling me 2 things. What kind of a teacher is this? Bad teacher, don't study with him. He says that. Yeah. So he says, let us look at the Bhashya which we just read. He says, look here, Kasmin vidite sarvavid bhavati iti Shaunakena prishtam. By Shaunaka it was asked, knowing which one thing one becomes all knowing. Then, tasmin vaktavye aprishtam aha angiraha. So then, tasmin vaktavye means in response, aprishtam aha. That which was not asked was addressed by the teacher angiraha, angiras. By what? By the sentence Dve vidye ityadina. By this sentence Dve vidye etc. By this sentence the two kinds of knowledges must be studied. The teacher has gone off track. In fact, the teacher has gone off. Why? Because the teacher doesn't know what he is talking about. The student is asking one thing. Granted, I found fault with that one thing, but okay, you convinced me. Fine, I went along with you. And now to find first an unsatisfactory student and now an unsatisfactory teacher, maybe they deserve one another. And so, Adi Shankara responds, Naisha doshaha.
Naisha doshaha.
There is nothing wrong with this scenario. And then he gives the reason. This is typical Bhashya style. Krama apekshatvat. Prativachanasya.
Prativachanasya.
Vachana here means a sentence. Prativachana means response. So vachana means question. Prativachana, that which was directed towards the question, which is a response. Naisha doshaha prativachanasya. This question, this answer is not having any fallacy at all. Neither the teacher is bad, nor his manner of speaking is bad, nor he is gone off, nor he was woken up from a sleep and he doesn't know what he is saying. None of the above are true. Why? Kramatvat. Kramatvat means there is an order to explain everything. And you can't get to that one thing without discussing two things. So obviously I'll discuss two things to get to that one thing. So don't jump on the case. So here he says krama. Krama means there is an order, Like for example, in a fire ritual, there is an order. First you make the fire pit, then you put the sticks in it, and then you slather the sticks in the ghee, and then you light the fire. You cannot say first I will light the fire, then dig a pit, and then put the ghee. This is not in order. But what do I want to know? When do I put the ghee? But then before I put the ghee, all these other things must be in order. Otherwise, what is the use of the ghee there? Correct? Same thing, you cannot, in the cooking recipe also, if somebody asks when do I add the salt, first you have to start about boiling the water and the vegetables. You can't just say add the salt. To what am I adding the salt, etc. There is a krama there. Krama means there is an order here. And the questioner who doesn't know is taught the order. And what is the order? That there are two kinds of knowledges, the finite and the infinite. And both must be known. And if he had just focused on the infinite, the finite would have been useless, rendered useless. If the knowledge of the finite is useless, then why should I study it? Then straight away everybody should start qualifying for this knowledge, knowing which everything is as well as known, and straight away everybody, the kindergartner, should start chanting Vedanta mantras. But that's not true. The 5-year-old is interested in play, correct? I've chanted that verse from the Bhajagovindam. Balastavat krida saktah, tarunastavat taruni raktah, vriddhastavat chinta magnah, pare brahmani kopi na lagnah. When is the correct time to study this knowledge? Somebody asked. And the writer laments. What about when you start fresh as a child? The child is interested only in toys. Even though they say toys or us, the child is not interested in us, only in toys. Yeah. And then what? Young age, when the mind is in the fullest capacity, you remember everything, and your mind is, the brain cells are at their optimal capacity. The youth, is the best time to study. The youth is interested in other youth. That's the only topic of interest. Okay, old age, after retirement, after fulfilling all your responsibility. In the old age, the elderly person is worried, full of worry. When will I die? Will I die first or will my spouse die first? And if my spouse dies first, that's not good, because then I'll be all alone. But then if I die first, then the spouse will be all alone. That's also not good. Either way there is worry, correct? How will they take care of themselves? Either way there is worry. And then will my children heed my wishes? Will they get along after I die? Even while you are alive, they are not getting along. So don't worry, okay? Yeah, it will be say, business as usual. So, will they apportion the property properly? Who should I leave what? All these worries that comes in the way of gaining this knowledge. So really speaking, Pare Brahmani, Para, same word. In Para knowledge, nobody is really interested. It's very easy to get interested in Apara knowledge, in the knowledge of means, in the knowledge of ways and means. But the knowledge that represents the end of the human quest, very few people are interested. And so, the one cannot be addressed without the other. Why? Because the first one, which is the knowledge of means and ends, relative knowledge of how things work and what happens, and knowledge of, all DIY, do it yourself knowledge, all kinds of knowledges. The relative knowledge depends on the absolute. The absolute does not depend on the relative. So even though really speaking all knowledge is just one, but really we are making this division between the apparent and the real, between the finite and the infinite, between the temporary and the changing and the unchanging, because this distinction is felt in everyday life. And here the Upanishad is giving a nod to the diversity that we see, the manifestations that we see, and that we have to deal with, sometimes painfully so. Like robbers and all you have to deal with, in everyday life. We cannot falsify that and say, all I am interested is in Para knowledge, take my house, take my spouse, take everything and go, all I am interested is in Para knowledge. You cannot say that. You have to deal with, difficult people, you have to deal with difficult situations, and so that difficulty comes from a perceived duality nonetheless. But as long as it is perceived and it has a certain relative existence, because you are not imagining it, everybody is afflicted by this duality as it were. So the Upanishad is very grounded and does not just go off on some kind of a philosophical tangent and says there are two kinds of knowledges and both must be known. It's a tavya, like kartavya. Tavya means it has to be done. There is an enjoining. It has a force of a mandate. So there is a Vedic mandate, an Upanishadic mandate. Know the relative and know the absolute. Because if you focus on the absolute, you dissociate, really. Yeah, you dissociate. And if you focus only on the relative, you know what? You just get caught up in relatives. That's all you do. Yeah. So both have to be known and both have their place and both have their place in this quest. And what is their place? We will see when? In time. Om Purnamadah Purnamidam Purnat Purnamadachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha Harihi Om. Questions? Online, in person. No questions? Really? Too many nanus came, that's why. I'm glad you are there, Soumya. Wonderful. I hope you can come to the New Year party. Yes.
I have sort of a past history question. So, within this knowledge, attitude, the removal of ignorance changes my attitude in life, in living and perceptions. And so many other bodies of knowledge that I've had contact with in the past, the rising of the,
Kundalini.
the bike way and
Yes.
connection, and
Yes.
a lot of them are, or the alignment of the chakras and all of that. In what way, so this parampara does one way, are these other ways?
Well, that's a very good question. Because to answer that question, we have to look with a binocular at the fundamental problem. The question here which was asked is very important. The question is, there are so many paramparas, so many lineages that focus on so many various different kinds of practices, different kinds of things. One says sit up straight, don't slouch. The other one says that there are certain chakras that have to be aligned in the body. The third one says meditate. The fourth one says forget meditation, go serve the needy and the poor. And the fifth one says sit with the eyes closed and practice Trataka. What is Trataka? Staring, at a particular, direction inside. And then, do all these, or staring at a candle. So, why, can't all these, are there many ways to understand what that second knowledge is, that is para, the absolute? Are there many ways to get to the absolute? And you see, to answer this question, very important question, we have to understand the nature of the problem. What is the nature of the problem? The nature of the problem is that there is no need to get to that, because you are already that. If that you seek to seek to know is separated from you by time or space, then these practices might take you closer, because any kind of karma action is finite and can lead you to only finite results. We are talking of discovering and assimilating the knowledge of the infinite as yourself. So for that, the action cannot produce the limitless, because action is limited, the effects of the action are limited, and then, and this knowledge besides is not a product. It is uncreated, limitless you from which you are not separated. So can that oneness be experienced through meditation, Kundalini? Sure. But we are not talking of the experiential oneness. But why do you have to worry about Kundalini and all these things? That oneness is experienced every day in sleep, which everyone loves because there is no duality. You don't have to become a famous Kundalini master in order to experience oneness. Just promptly go to sleep. Even in Vedanta class, you can experience oneness immediately when your eyes doze off. Correct? Because there is no difference between the dozer and the dozed. There's only dozing. So you see that ing is there. That ing is limitlessness. So therefore you don't need all these practices, because the practice of going to sleep is producing that experience of non-duality which already is. Producing means manifesting it. So we are not lacking experiences. And at any time you have a feeling of uniting with an object of desire, whether it's a person or a place or a thing or an event or a body of knowledge, when that separation between the desirer and the object of desire goes, then again you have that experience of that oneness. You become one with God, you become one with that presence, you become one with the truth of yourself. But really speaking, the word become has to be used in heavy quotation marks, because there is no becoming. It's very unbecoming, because it's already there. You are already one, and you don't need these various crafted or staged situations to bring out that oneness. You don't need those staged situations, because if the oneness was always dependent on it being brought out repeatedly in situations, then those practices become important. But that oneness is always is and can be connected as the truth of the knower and the known through understanding, because what you are separated from is not through time or space. You are separated by that truth of yourself as para through ignorance. And the antidote of ignorance is knowledge. We saw that in the introductory bhashya, tamah prakashavat virudhadvat, that it's viruddha. Because like the tamah prakashayoho ekasmin sthane, in one place light and darkness cannot preside. So similarly, knowledge is opposed to ignorance. And so that knowledge which removes and spirits away the ignorance, like the light that spirits away the darkness, is what this knowledge accomplishes. So what about sitting and staring in one place, or meditation or service, etc.? All those come under what we are going to see tomorrow, apara. Apara means what? The knowledge of means and ends, which help you to get to a place of emotional maturity and spiritual growth to assimilate this understanding. That is what it is. So it's because the knowledge is dependent upon a means of knowledge. Like for example, if I say that in order to see this flower, the color and the form of this flower, you require the eyes. It's a statement of fact. You can sense the flower in other ways. Supposing one cannot see, one can, smell it, one can touch it, one can hear it, it may make a little rustling sound. You can experience the flower in other ways. But if you want to see color and form, you need eyes. If I say that, there is nothing fanatic about it, it's a fact. There is no fanaticism about it. Like, oh please, can I see it some other way? There is no other way, because the eyes are a means of knowledge that help to shed light on form and color. That is their job. So this too, we regard these words of the Upanishad as a means of knowledge that sheds the light or sheds the ignorance of the eye. So the words are a means of knowledge when no other means help one in learning something. Because no other means are there, because how can the knower intuit oneself? Yes, you can get a vague sense, all is one, one is all. I mean, even Shaunaka, the questioner here, the student had that sense. Yes, like all the pots are clay, all the ornaments are gold. There must be something in the Jagat which is non-separate from me. That longing is built. One is born with that inbuilt desire, with that inbuilt longing. One is born with that. It's an uncultivated desire. To be one with everything is an uncultivated desire. But whether that oneness is experienced or understood, there's a big difference, because whenever that oneness is experienced, that experience itself comes and goes, leaving one in doubt which one is really me. But that knowledge is that which does not leave anyone in doubt. So the knowledge is dependent upon a means of knowledge. Like if I say this is flower, and please look at this wonderful flower. What happened? You will say till now she made sense, but now something happened to her. Let's check the fever, temperature. Maybe she's got temperature, she's calling the pot a flower. At least if she said flower pot, I would have understood, but this is just a pot. And she's calling it flower. So your eyes cannot, the knowledge is as true as the object. Vastu tantram jnanam. The knowledge does not change. It is as true, it is exactly as true as the object that it reveals. Whereas karma, kartru-tantram, the action is dependent upon the doer. The knowledge is dependent upon the object that it reveals. So what it reveals being self-revealing, meaning the I always is, always comes to light. It's not unknown, it is known. It's just the nature of the I is discerned from what it is not. So what it is not drops away. That is the knowledge which we call the Upanishad. It can be in any language, it can be in any country, it can be anyhow. That which removes ignorance is what I want. Yes, I don't want one more experience of oneness.
And so the
I want to know the nature of the experiencer. Yeah.
And so the commonality across paramparas or different methods
Yeah.
is a recognition
Yes.
of that longingness to be
Yes.
one, and a
Yes.
seeking for multiple ways.
Yes. Absolutely.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this one makes sense to me.
Good. I'm so happy it does. I'm glad it speaks to you. Oh.